Today we're going to make this box with all of these tools, which is a lot. So it gave me an idea. We're going to take away a tool from each procedure and replace it with something more user-friendly, more budget-friendly. So with these tools, we end up making this box. And with these tools, we make this box. And the very last box is made entirely with this tool. But you're gonna have to stick around to see how that one ends up. So let's start on this one first. And actually, it all starts with the wood that you order. So you see, if I had a table saw, planer, thicknesser, bandsaw, I could start to mill my own timber, but I don't. So for that reason, the first thing I do whenever I got a project that I'm just thinking about or planning or starting, I go online, I find the timber that I want, and I order it at just a little bit bigger than the size that I want. That way, I don't have to order a tree and start hacking away at it until I've got a board. Okay, before anybody says it, I know you can get a tree down to this using these and a few saws. But these are going to be used later on. Who's got the time to do that on a small project like a box? All right, let's make a couple of assumptions early on. I'm going to assume you've all got a tape measure, some sort of marking device, and a square of some description, maybe a combination square. Also going to assume you've got access to sandpaper at the very least. And design-wise, well, we're not going to go for mitered corners. We're going to go for rebated corners on every box that we can manage them on. As Steve Ramsey says, if you can make boxes in woodworking, you can make anything. Or most of things you make in woodworking are made up of boxes. He's got a catchy line about boxes. Admittedly, this is pricey, so feel free to use a normal pencil. Job 2 is cutting the boards to the dimensions we need for the box, and here is the first of our tool hurdles. I'm going to use a circular saw with a crosscut Craig jig. Now, if we're going to take out one tool from every single one of the procedures, we're going to have to replace the circular saw and the crosscut jig. And that's where the handsaw comes in. Let's get the sides of this first box cut. I'll use the circular saw, but for the next one, we're going to have to get these handsaws out. I'll show you that as well. You're going to see every procedure from start to finish. And as we go, I'm going to tell you the reason for making this video. It's quite a big bugbear of mine in this YouTubing world. Right, so we're going to lose the circular saw, which means we're going to have to cut using our selection of handsaws. Now, this is the fancy one. I'm not going to assume everyone's got this. So at some stage, we're going to have to replace this one as well. This, I'm just going to assume everybody's got access to some sort of a DIY shop saw. It's terrible, but it does the job. And if this is all you have to make your cuts, it's well worth making yourself a little block to guide it. It can be a bench hook, or it could just be one of these that, to be honest with you, I have no idea where it came from. So when you're cutting these by hand, take your time, because unless you've got a shooting board and a hand plane, you're going to have to get these square pretty much straight away. As soon as you start trying to square them with sandpaper, you might get a couple of rounded edges, and it can actually make it worse. So now you've got your sides cut to length. The next thing we need to do is pop a rebate on them so that they form a really nice, firm, sturdy corner. Now for the box, where we're open to using any tools that we want, I'm going to go straight in with the router table. It's quick, it's clean, and it's easy to do the repeatable cuts. I'm going to whiz through this because actually I've just released a box build a few weeks ago that does all of this in depth, but I'll show you a little bit of what we did. But now we've got the rebates on the every toolbox, as I'm now going to call it, but because not everybody might have a router, we got to get rid of it. So let's put the all you can tools box to one side because that's got its rebates, and let's grab our budget-friendly, beginner-friendly option to do the rebates on the next one. And that's where we go straight back to these. These are going to be to cut the actual rebate itself. But before you can dive in with one of these, it's really sensible to mark it out carefully first. And once you've marked it out carefully, then I would highly suggest making yourself a knife wall. This is just simply made with a chisel and a marking knife if you have one. You could use a Stanley knife or a scalpel or whatever sharp knife you have. When using a knife on hardwood, across the grain, take lots and lots of shallow passes rather than trying to cut one deep groove. And then carefully go in at it from the outside with a chisel to make that wall. This is going to hold your saw in line. It's a brilliant way of making sure you take some of the human error out of what you're doing. So the first thing to notice with these cuts is that the Japanese pull saw, because of its fine curve, sits so nicely against that knife wall, you will always get a cleaner cut than you will with the cheap Western style handsaw. And once we've done the cross grain cut, Now we have to do the slightly harder cut into the ends to finish off the rebate. And as you can see, they're not perfect at this stage. Now, there's two ways you can clean this up. One, you can go at it with a chisel. If you've done your pencil lines accurately, then the chisel down to the pencil lines and measure, measure, measure will get you to where you need to be. Me, I was very lucky. A couple of years ago, I was in a charity shop and I picked up something that I didn't even really know what it did. What happens with this is that the two sides or the base of it ride along the top part of the wood, and then the blade is sat lower, and that will route out the groove to a certain depth, and it'll stop once you hit that bottom. I have used this on each and every one of the rebates on the box. It takes a bit of fine tuning, it takes a good bit of sharpening, but it does a great job of just making sure all your rebates are the same depth. So if you haven't got one of these, here's an idea. Get yourself on YouTube, get yourself on Grey Otter Studios, go and have a look at the router plane that he made from scratch. It's really easy. Okay, step 3, and let's go back to the all the tools box, because we've now got to cut the grooves to hold the lid and the base. And don't worry, we will get to the hand tool version of this in a sec. So what I'm going to do is run a rebate at the bottom and a rebate about a third to a half of the way up for the lid, and then I'm going to cut off the excess. All of this I'm going to do with the router table and the circular saw. But don't forget, that's only good for the first box. Fortunately though, we haven't got to get to a third box yet, because we can do the hand tooled grooves on the box where we did the hand tooled rebates. So if you haven't got a batch pad or a corded router and a router table, rebates are going to be a little bit tricky. You could get yourself one of these, and this does a phenomenal job. I let it down through lack of skill and practice, but it's basically a plough plate. It runs along the side of your piece and it keeps the iron in line along the groove. This one is quite simple. How far the iron is down is the depth of cut you're going to take with it. There are a couple of things to note when using one of these. It's as good as how sharp you can get the iron. I always start at the front, well, because Paul Sellers told me to. Anyway, it seems easier. You start at the front and you chip your way back, and then you can take long passes after that. You might not have one of these. If I'm basing the tools that I take out on making it simpler, that is not necessarily the simplest way of doing it. What we do have as the guaranteed beginner tool is this saw. So can we make this saw cut a rebate? So we're going to have another box on the go at the same time as the other two. And for the third box, I'm not going to show you the getting it up to this stage. Just know that I cut the wood and the rebates with a handsaw just like the second box, because there's no point putting more tools back in right now. And just before we dive in on that box, I promised I'd tell you exactly why I'm doing this video. What really prompted me to make this video is the comments that for years I've seen in every YouTube video saying, I could make that if I had all the tools you've got in your workshop. And I'm not saying that those comments aren't necessarily true. Those tools will help you make it, but please don't let that be an excuse that you don't pick up the tools you do have and make something with those. And don't get me wrong, it's a lot harder. And potentially the results may not come out quite as good. In fact, watch the next bit, because it does get a little bit tricky. I can put a depth stop on the saw, so it only cuts halfway through. Then that straight away is going to mean that I can cut a straight line to a certain depth just using the saw. The next thing I need to do is to cut it a certain distance from the edge. So I'm going to set up a stop that will run along the side of the board to keep me in a straight line and a certain distance from that edge. And then the last thing I need to do is actually stick the piece to the table so it doesn't go anywhere. With this setup, it means I can do the outer cut of the groove on all of my pieces, top and bottom. But obviously the groove needs to have two cuts, one at the top and one at the bottom of it, with then the rest of the waste removed. Now for the second cut, I'm taking a piece of 5mm plywood as the spacer. This means that the two grooves we're going to make are going to be exactly 5mm apart plus the kerf of the blade. So as it stands, it's going to be slightly wider than a 5mm piece of ply, which is fine because we're going to veneer it. And once you've made all the cuts on all your pieces, you can take a chisel or even the saw itself and hog out the rest of the waste. If you're going to use the saw, keep the depth stop on it so that you don't go too deep. And I have to say, the results were surprisingly good. So for anybody counting, we are up to 3 boxes. And we're not finished there. So with this original piece, the other ones I've got at different sizes because I had the timber cut down to different widths. This one we now need to just take the top off. Now, I'd normally say this is the all your tools box. So circular saw, cut it off. Here's the problem. My Craig jig, this is too long for it. So, like all of them, if you need to trim them, there's certain times where you've just got to get a handsaw out and a hand plane and trim them, and then we'll make the base and the lid. And we're nearly there on this one. At least the saw is one that we're using for all of them. Apart from if you don't have a Japanese rip saw, then you're just going to have to make your crosscut saw work. Right, 3 boxes, all the sides are done. They just need lids and bases. And the lid for each box is going to be dictated by the tools that I'm allowed to use with it. I'm not going to add anything in to try and make it fancier. You'll see. And while we do that, I'll tell you about what I did to try and get the base worked out. For the base, I'm just using a 5mm piece of ply with veneer on either side, glue it on and let it dry overnight, and then cut it down to size. The lid itself, as you can see here, the box with all the tools, I'm going a little bit to town with the grinder. I figure if I can use everything, I'm going to use everything. All the different bits, all the new extra sanding bits that I've brought to try and make life easier, the whole shebang. But obviously I can't do that on all of the box lids. So on the second one, which is limited tools, I'm going to try something more hand tooly, if you like. But first I've got to fit the board to the box. And I did a very shallow bevel on both sides, which was an error. It doesn't look great. But then I took a gouge and tried to do a pattern of sorts, which got deeper and deeper and deeper. I'll let you see it at the end. You can tell me what you think of it. Personally, I have to say off the bat, I'm not a fan. And it was a lot of work. 2 lids down, 1 to go. I want to try something a bit different with the third box. I want to keep it simple. So for this, all I've done is joint together some scrap woods of sapele with a bit of the lighter oak in it, and I'm just going to smarten it up and use that as the lid. But I do still want it to sit within the box because I like the way that looks, and it's a much more stable way of having a lid on the box. But with the tools we're allowed to use on this box, that's going to be a little bit tricky. We need to have a rebate running all the way around the side that then will sit inside the grooves in the box. We need to measure to 2 points, and I've cut it to the size of the opening of the box plus the depth of the rebate on either side. And I've given myself a little bit here because I think there's going to be some fine tuning. Now normally I'd take this to the router table and we'd just put a rebate on it. Good to go. But for this one, I've then drawn an interior line, which is the exact opening of the box. So that should be where the box actually meets the lid. Once again, easier with power tools, but I think it's doable with a hand saw. Now I'm conscious there's going to be a lot of people looking at this right now going, why are you doing that? What a faff. You've got all the tools, why don't you use them? Do you know what? This bit of the project has been the most fun, trying to see if I could get rebates in a lid without anything but a saw. This is what I used to do when I had the shed, when I had no power, no tools. When I was just starting out, I loved the challenge of trying to figure this out. And so it was fun. So once you're confident the fit is good with that lid, and it did take a little bit of fine tuning, what we've then got to do is get the bases. Now the lid is the best template you're going to have for the inset bases. So grab the 2 lids you've got, or 3 or 4, or however many you've needed to make, and let's make the base. Because the grooves are the same depth, top and bottom, for the base and the lid, take the piece for the lid and trace it out on whatever you're going to cut the base from, and then cut it with whatever tools you have, and that should fit in the box absolutely perfectly. I've forgotten which step we're up to, but now we're going to do a bit of finishing. Use whatever tools you have to do the pre-finish. Obviously on the box with all the tools, I've gone up to about 240 grit through the sandpapers and 7 or 8 hours worth of hand sanding, because still, I couldn't get it any quicker. So now we've got the lids and the bases and all the sides cut. We're pretty much there, but, well, I had a thought. It dawned on me that people watching might think that the rebates and the grooves are actually a little bit beyond where they are right now. And so why not just do it without them? Cut your long sides, cut your short sides, using the knife wall and the chisel method if you can. If not, getting them as square as you possibly can and then just not worrying about it. And then glue them together. It's probably the simplest box you'll ever make, but it'll still be nice. Let's make that one as well. Now, I'm not going to show you all of the glue ups because they're all fairly simple. I'll just do the 2 basics. So on the very basic butt joint box, how you put the clamps on will determine how square it is, because if you put pressure slightly diagonally on one of the clamps, you're going to move the box across a little bit. So try and get them as straight as possible, and then let the wood and the cuts you've done do the rest of the work. One big area that I haven't shown you is using a hand plane to flatten off all of the sides. And I'm going to assume that everyone's got access to a hand plane of some sorts, be it a block plane or an old number 4 or a brand new Veritas or something fancy. If you haven't, this technique where you just stick sandpaper to a flat surface and then rub your piece consistently across it will get the job done. Now the grit level will determine how fast it happens. Once you've flattened the basic box down, you can then fit your lid. A great way to alleviate squeeze out here is to actually take off the glue off the inner edge of all of the sides before you put the lid on and clamp it. Easiest thing to do with this, the reason I haven't put the lid on at the same time is because to trim it flush, you need to be able to get to both sides. And well, you can't, if you put another one on top that's oversized, you can't get close enough without a bit of hassle. So I'm going to trim it. Any old saw you're going to use, just get as close as you can, and then either do what we did before with the sandpaper on the stone to get it flush, or if you've got a hand plane and you're going to use it for this, do the same. Then, same method, glue the lid on the top. Everything here has been sanded up to about 180 grit with here orbital sander and then hand sanding all the way back down. One thing I will say about taking tools out, it certainly slows the process down. Even if it is possible to make the things, it certainly takes a bit longer and a little bit more effort. What you do need to consider when you're gluing these up now is this. This is real wood. This is the lid, and it is going to expand. It's not going to expand along the grain particularly, but it is going to go across the grain and contract as well, depending on the seasonal changes. And it's why we float it. So when you're gluing it, it's really important that you only glue the middle bit here and the middle bit here. And the reason for that is these bits need to be able to move. The base, glue the whole thing. Hold the box together, give it a bit more rigidity. Let's talk about the little box that I made with just a saw. This has had the top and the bottom glued onto it now. And you know what? I don't think that this is an attractive box. So I've got another idea for it. If you're not happy with what you're making and no one's asked you to make it and you're just doing it for the hobby, for fun, for learning, you don't like it, change it. I'm going to cut it in half, but I'm going to do the technique on all of these to remove the lid, and I'm only going to explain it once, hopefully. With a tile or something smooth, with this clamped down on top of it, and with a saw elevated up to the line that you want to cut, you can actually do it in quite a foolproof fashion. But on the fancy boxes, I'm going to use this. Where I can use all the tools, I'm going to use all the tools because the small kerf makes it easier, but well, this is the box that's been made solely with this saw so far. When you're doing this, after every side, clear the debris off the tile, because then this won't raise this up in a weird angle. And where possible, make sure that you cut the corner first to match the other corner on both sides, because it'll give you less cleanup later. As messy as this looks, that's not bad. Couple of hinges, that will make a clunky, ugly box, but a box nonetheless. And again, in my last video, I showed this in real detail, taking the lids off these boxes with this technique. It's a really foolproof way of removing a lid and leaving yourself the least amount of work to clean it up if you don't have big power tools. And I did that for all of the boxes. Now, once the lids are off, use whatever tools you've got at your disposal to give them a clean up. Again, in the last video, I showed me doing it with a Sweetheart number 4 jack plane. You could use sandpaper, again, gluing it to a flat surface, whatever works for you. And then we've got the biggest question of all, because these boxes are finished. The biggest question is, what are we going to do with them? And so there you have it. It took all of these tools to make this box. But, and here's the thing, I don't think it would have been possible to get the same finish on this lid as I have without the die grinder and the orbital sander and a lot of hard work. The rest of the box, well, we've shown you can do that with a whole lot less. Finish wise, I've put tung oil on it and lid attachment hinges. Are they perfect? Well, I haven't shown you a close-up. Took 3 attempts. They got bigger each time to cover the gap that I'd made a bit of a mess of. But overall finish, I'm really happy with how that's come out. But the idea of the video is to show you all that you can do a lot with a little. And this isn't a little. Let's take away the tools that were only allowed on the every toolbox. And this is what we're left with. This is the second box. Design-wise, I hate it. Functionality, well, it's square. The lid matches the bottom. The joints are tight. It's a box. The big difference is the lid, the actual style, design. Don't like it. It didn't come out how it was pictured in my head, but I can't blame it all on the lack of tools. But if I had more skill with hand tools, I could have made it look a lot nicer than I have. And actually the next box will show you that maybe I should have kept it simple. Finish-wise, I took the easy way out. I went with a spray lacquer. A couple of coats, quickly done. It's the most beginner-friendly finish I know. So for the next box, well, we had to lose some tools. This is what we came up with. Have to say, what I said earlier, keeping the lid inset really simple actually makes this box 10 times more attractive than the last. And just like the last, all of the joinery on it is very solid. I did my most hated lid attachment, hinges, and well, these actually came out all right. It's a lottery. I've finished this in tung oil. Not in love with the finish, but I'm going to try and polish it up with some wax, get a bit of a shine on it, because you do get quite a dull finish with the tung oil. But for the lack of tools, that came out all right. And for the last box, we had to lose a few more, and this is what we got. One saw made this. The question here is, did I prove my point at the start? Did I get past my biggest bugbear in YouTube? Well, it's not a box. But as far as quality of trays go, I think they've got a good finish and the joinery is absolutely rock solid. And if you think about it, the reason it's not a box is actually my fault. It's a design issue. So it's all me, it's not actually the technique. And on the other boxes, I cut grooves and rebates with just this. So technically, I could have made a much more attractive box with just this. Hopefully this will inspire people to try something that might feel a little bit out of reach with the tools you've got or the skill level you've got. And I don't mind admitting, I still consider myself to be a beginner, low intermediate woodworker. And I'd like to think one of the boxes at least that I've produced is punching above my weight with the tools that I've got and the skills that I've got. If you agree, click the like button, subscribe, join us on the channel. If you liked this video, last week's was a really detailed way of making boxes, and it outlines everything you've seen today but with much more depth. I'll put it up there for you. But if you've already seen it, see what that one's like. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you over there.